Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement. My name is Tony Roig. I hope you're all doing well out there. This week we are wrapping our last camp here in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. I'm here with my partner CJ Johnson. We have our third camp of 3, so it's going to be should be a lot of fun today to get out on the courts and work with some players who are definitely interested in improving their pickleball game, and that is our job as their instructors and coaches. And that's frankly what CJ and I dedicate ourselves to in our entirety, including the summit coming up and everything else we do is aimed at bringing you the best in pickleball content, including this podcast and the YouTube channels and everything else. This week's podcast, I think you're going to really enjoy it. We're going to be talking about, sometimes we kind of feel a little bit lost out there, right? Maybe a little bit lost out in the forest, walking around, and we don't really know which way to go, which way the compass points. And I got an email from a gentleman named David, and I will read that to you, and then we're going to talk about it in the main section. And then in the riff, I want to talk about targeting, where you target a particular player in match play, and talk about maybe when it's the right thing to do and maybe when it should be reconsidered. So that's this week's podcast. As we get into the podcast, I want to remind you that we have the Pickleball Summit coming up at the end of June. It's going to be a lot of fun. There's some really, really, really strong presentations in this year's summit. Every year has strong presentations, and this year is no exception to that. Sometimes you go into a presentation expecting something, and you get something that is way stronger than what you expected, as good as you may have thought the original was going to be. Can't recommend the summit enough to you. If you register for the summit, it's free. It's online. You can check it out at home. We did a little kind of a skit on it yesterday. We were filming some stuff, and we were like, you can even watch it on the pickleball court if you want to. You can watch it wherever you want. It is free to attend during the days of the summit. So all the presentations are included. You can watch them day of summit. You also get in. There's a really cool grand prize that our summit team put together for it. It's valued at something like almost $3,000, like $2,700. Obviously, those rules apply. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited, all that kind of language. But it's a lot of fun. Check it out. And the other thing about it is, if you do want to get the most out of it, there's an all-access pass. Highly recommend you check that out. There is a cost associated with it, with the all-access pass, not with attending the summit, because I hate to tell you, there are costs associated with doing the work that we do, storing the information, having it available to you and things like that. So there is a cost associated with the all-access pass if you want that, but there's absolutely no reason not to at least attend one presentation at the summit. I guarantee you there's at least one presentation that you're going to look at in the playbook and go, I need to be there. So check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can get your ticket for this year. All right, let's jump into Dave's email. So this is the email he sent me. I'm reading it word for word, and he agreed to let us share this. We always check before we share this information. If you send it to us in an email, if you post it publicly, we may use it without asking because you already posted it publicly. But when you send us an email like this, and it was in response to last week's podcast where I talked about the pickleball therapist idea. If you haven't heard that podcast yet, check it out and let us know what you think about the therapist idea. You can send us an email either at therapy@betterpickleball.com or pickleballtherapy@betterpickleball.com. I almost forgot. I almost did it, right? My name is Tony Roig. I'm your host for the podcast. So I'm a senior pro player and a master teacher professional. I don't think I said that earlier, and I promise you I'd say it from now on. So anyway, but Dave sent us this email, so I checked with Dave to ask him. I said, a lot of players out there probably feel this way from time to time. Do you mind if I share it? And he said, that'd be great if you want to share it, and then we're going to talk about it. So here's the email. Playing now for a year, conservatively 3.0. Struggling with where I want to go. Tell me that doesn't resonate, right? Versus where my closer friends are going. That also may resonate with you. Have not played tournaments, a bit scared. I like to win and play to win. Does that resonate with you? Again, does that resonate with you or my commentaries, right? Mostly scared of letting my partner down. I'm a nice guy on court. If a partner faults, I say positive things. In order of priorities, I'd go fun, challenge, social, exercise, competition. This is me talking. I bet a lot of you out there, that's similar to your list. It may change a little bit the order and may not have all of them or may have other things on there, but it resonates with a lot of you out there. And then he says, here's the key. So I'm very conflicted. If I go to play, the whole winning aspect gets in my head and my play suffers. Sometimes I'll sit out due to this. And that's the saddest part of this kind of story, right? Not just Dave's, anybody's story, when you're actually not playing because of this conflict that you're feeling. Then he says, I like the quote, therapy, close quote, idea, because I think this may be the key to happiness in pickleball. And then he signs it, Lost Dave. So I'm going to unpack that. We're going to talk about it a little bit in terms of how to deal with it when you're feeling lost out there. And even if you're not feeling completely lost, there are times that you feel a little bit maybe like miffed or not happy with yourself and or the game you're playing. So we're going to deal with it in today's podcast. And I'll give you some suggestions on how you can maybe reframe what you're going through and perhaps feel a little differently about the way you're playing pickleball and about your relationship with the sport in general, not just each time you play, because it'll all percolate through. One of the things I thought was interesting was I asked Dave whether we could share this, and he said sure in the email. And then he said something like, that he was happy he stuck with the podcast, because when he first heard the podcast, he was like, all right, get to the point. But then he's happy that he stuck with it. And I'm going to tell you that's part of this, right? Sticking with the process is important. There may be times on this podcast where you might think I'm kind of droning on a little bit or rambling on a little bit. Might happen. This podcast comes from the heart, and I'm flowing with what I'm thinking as I'm chatting with you about different subjects, right? And sometimes it may seem like I'm a little bit off point, but I will generally speaking come back to the point, and I hope that you're getting something out of the podcast at the end of the day, right? So give the process a chance. Give yourself some calmness and some relaxation when you're listening to this. Get yourself in the right frame of mind when you're listening to our podcast, and it'll really help you process the information. All right, let's talk a little bit about let's dive into some things that Dave mentioned and some things that we can maybe work on to improve our relationship and not to feel lost and not to feel frustrated or confused and things like that. One of the things is the big picture item I want to leave you with on this is perspective. I want you to understand that you really have to start from a point of a different perspective than the one that perhaps you're used to. And this is not a criticism of anybody, and I've been in the same boat. I used to play tennis, and in tennis, I used to throw my racket and pick. I smashed rackets as a young player. I don't remember smashing them as an adult, but maybe I did. Somebody will reach out and say, "Hey, I remember when you smashed the racket." I guess. And paddles, I've thrown paddles. I've been pissed off. I've chucked paddles. I've cursed. I've done all sorts of things on a pickleball court, and it's perfectly normal to feel that way. And here, I'm going to give you my theory on what's happening. This is my informed but not formally educated theory on this process. What's happening to you is it's your lizard brain that's taken over. And if you think about it, it'll make sense in a second, right? This is where I may go a little bit on a tangent. You're like, lizard brain, maybe I need to sign off. But I think it'll make sense once you see how it all comes together. So, if you go back in time, right, from an evolutionary standpoint, we needed to be the ones to get the acorn or get the food, right? The fruit or the vegetable, right? And it was a contest. If we got it, we survived. If the squirrel or the other animal or the other human or whatever got the acorn or the thing that we intended to use as our sustenance, then we died, literally. We starved during the winter. And so there was a very hardwired part of our brain, reptilian brain or lizard brain, that basically is wired to help us survive. And nowadays, obviously, wherever you live, whatever, my grocery store is Publix in Florida, so that's where we go, normally. So, I can go to Publix and get anything I want to eat. I can overeat. I'm not worried about food, right? And wherever you're at, you have the same situation, probably. And so that part of our brain is still there, though, but it doesn't have to fight for food anymore. So what do we replace it with? Replace it with things like pickleball, with winning a game. What happens is the game becomes more important than it probably should be. And listen, I'm not trying to suggest to you that pickleball is not important. I want it to be important to you. Billie Jean King said that the fact that you feel pressure means you care, right? So when she was playing, she embraced the pressure because she said, you know what? That pressure means that I care about what I'm doing. And that's perfectly fine. There's a line, though, between feeling like caring about what you're doing and having it so dominate your mind, so dominate your feelings that you feel like Dave does here, where he's feeling like, I'm going to sit out right now because I'm so upset about whatever's happening right now that I can't even play the game, right? And again, not a criticism of Dave or anybody else who feels this way. It's natural. But if you understand it, right, that what's going on with you is a little bit of a lizard brain mentality, right? And again, not a criticism saying it that way, but because I've had it too, that you're, I need to win the game or else what, right? And so you start filling that in with maybe a more positive way of looking at it. And I'm going to give you a couple of different ways of processing it more positively in a second. But first is understanding what's going on, what's happening to you when you're feeling the way you're feeling about what at the end of the day is still a game played with a plastic paddle and a plastic ball on a court with friends, right? That's a really important thing to remember is normally you're playing with friends. Sometimes really good friends, close friends, sometimes with acquaintance type friends, but nonetheless, they are friends. And if you're not playing with friends, that's a whole other thing you need to analyze. Because I'll tell you this, I might not play as much as I used to, and it's not because there's not friends who are present there. It's because sometimes the vibe gets weird on some courts, some groups, some facilities, and just not my thing to go into a weird vibe situation. I'll address it on a different podcast. But anyway, remember, if you're going there voluntarily to engage in an activity, get some of the things like Dave mentioned about, fun and a challenge and socializing and things like that. So there's this positive stuff you're getting as part of this dance, right? Part of this exchange that you're doing. And what I would suggest to you is if you have a metric that's yours, right? And we call these useful, actionable metrics inside the pickleball system. If you're a system member, you've heard this from us, and I'm repeating it here to you because it's important to remember. If you're not a system member, I would say, what are you waiting for? But that's not the point of today's podcast. But if you're not a system member, this may be new to you. But the idea is winning and losing is a terrible metric. And I know we have an episode on this. I don't have the number at my hand right now. But winning and losing as a metric is not helpful at all. And a better metric is what'd you come to play for? Did you come to see your friends? Did you come to get exercise? As long as you're getting those things, you're getting what you came for. And if you can reframe your mind about, hey, wait a minute, you know what? I got to see Steve or Jane or whoever today. Great. Then you got what you came for and everything should be good. And the winning or losing takes a back seat. The other thing I'm going to suggest to you is that if you want to reframe your relationship with pickleball, you should work at it a little bit. There's no reason to expect that you will just inherently know how to deal with pickleball. In other words, that you will inherently know how to handle the stresses of engaging in this activity. And so putting in some work is really going to pay off for you in terms of improving your relationship with pickleball. And I want to address this as well and Dave mentioned it in his email. He says the whole winning aspect gets in my head and my play suffers. That's going to happen to you. If you're having negative thoughts, if you're having the lizard brain taking over and screaming bloody murder because you didn't win the last game, what'll happen is you'll actually play worse. So this work is not just, it's touchy-feely, and that's positive in and of itself to get the goodness out of it, of just feeling better, but you're actually going to play better. So there's a practical aspect to it. So what kind of work can you do? Well, listening to this podcast is a good way of doing it, right? I think right now we have 144 episodes with this one. There's a lot of content out there. Go back, listen to old episodes. These are not, the pickleball therapy podcasts are not time sensitive, right? So they're not basically like a podcast that talks about the next tournament coming up or whatever, or the latest thing to happen in pickleball. It's all about therapy in your mind. So you can go back and listen to the bowl of ice cream episode. You can listen to the winning and losing metric episode. You can listen to the interview with Coach Pete Scales, which is very early in our podcast. I think it's 5 episodes, starting at episode 9. So there's a lot of material here that you're welcome to listen to. And when you listen to an episode, there's nothing saying you can't listen to it again if it's going to help you. So that's some work you can do. Another thing I can recommend, a great place to start is Coach Pete's book. It's called A Mental and Emotional Training for Tennis. You can forget about the for tennis part because it applies equally to pickleball. Compete, Learn, Honor. The Compete, Learn, Honor is really important because that's the framework that he uses. It's just a great place to start with your journey on mental training, mental improvement. And I'm going to suggest to you 3 things. 1, it'll help you feel better about pickleball. 2, you're going to play better, as I mentioned before. And 3, it'll help you with life. You will be better at dealing with road rage, dealing with all sorts of life issues. The person in front of you at the checkout line at the grocery store that you're just like, oh my God, I need to get out of here. You just be much more relaxed because you're going to be understanding and more empathetic. You're going to be much more understanding because you have the tools that are helpful to you. And then, as I said, when you go out to play, remember why you came to play, right? Why did you come out to play today? And you're going to give your everything on the court. You're going to fight. You're going to give everything you can on the court. But the winning and losing is not why you're there. The winning and losing is a corollary. It's how we basically score the games. But you came there to do something else: socialize, have fun, get exercise, whatever it is. And the other thing I want you to remember is, and this is part reading Coach Pete's book will help you with this as well, is that when you're out there giving your all, there are your partner hopefully as well, but there's definitely two players on the other side that are doing what? They're giving their all as well, right? And what you want to learn to do is you want to learn to celebrate not just your victories, celebrate their victories as well. And I'm going to give you a word of the week. And this was a great suggestion by a fellow therapist, Kay. Really appreciate it, Kay. And her suggestion was, you know what if you gave us a word of the week? And I was like, that's a really good idea. So I started thinking about this week's podcast and what we're talking about with Dave. And a word that can really help you when you're out there is celebrate. And what I mean by that is I'm gonna give you the little pieces of it. So it's celebrate that you get to play pickleball. Celebrate your great shots and your victories. Celebrate those of your friends as well, meaning celebrate their great shots and their victories. So celebrate the good things that happen on the court, whether you did them or your friends did them out on the pickleball court. And at the end of this, what you're going to do is celebrate your continuing growth as a player. Now, I know that doesn't answer everything. There's no salve. There's no, silver bullet that I can give Dave or anybody listening to get you back on track, right? To get you unlost, if you will. But what I can do is give you some indications on things that you can do little by little to strengthen your conscious self when you're out there and to understand your subconscious lizard brain and how it's operating in there, and to move away from feeling so bad when you get an L, because if you start celebrating, you're going to celebrate everything that happens, including that great comeback victory by your friends who happen to be your opponents in that particular game. So hopefully that helps you, Dave, and everybody else listening about, when you're lost, how to find your way again. Keep working at it, and it's a process. Don't forget that, and it'll definitely, it's definitely something to keep working on and keep going. In the Riff, I want to talk about targeting. We're going to talk about targeting, which is, pretty common. Sometimes it's perfectly fine, as you'll see. Sometimes probably not the best idea in the world to be doing. Before we do that, I wanted to let you know that if you're listening to this anytime near its issue, near its publication, we are going to be having a workshop at towards the end of July. It's the third week in July. The 20th comes to mind, although don't quote me on that one, but it's somewhere around there. If you're on our email list, you'll get an email about it, or more than one email about it. But basically, it's a workshop to help you understand the soft game, understand how you can really elevate your pickleball by using the soft game. And I'll suggest to you that without the soft game, very, very, very difficult to continue to advance as a player. I learned that lesson. Jill and I learned that lesson early on in our careers, or fairly early on in our careers. And check that out. And then you'll also have an opportunity to join us for our next system class, if that's something you've been wanting to do. I'm going to say this probably 1,000 times between now and then. There's simply no obstacle to you joining a class other than a decision by you that you don't want to, because we make it that simple for you to join the class. All right, let's talk about target. So I'll link below to how you can join our email list if you're not on it already. Anyway, so let's talk about targeting. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical, and then we'll work through it and see what happens. So let's assume that your club, primarily your play at your club is, let's say 3-5, 3-0 to 3-5, okay, which is pretty average, pretty normal. Pretty normal club is 3-0, 3-5, and that's fine. That's great. That's good play. 3-0, 3-5 play out there. And a friend of one of the players comes to visit town, and this player happens to be a very good 4.0 player, right? Not quite 4.5, but solid 4.0 player, right? And that player maybe plays a game that's a little bit different than the play that you're used to at your club. So you go out to, you're going to go out to play, and let's say that there's a 3-0, 2 3-5s, and a 4-0. So maybe the natural thing would be to put the 4-0 together with the 3-0 and the 2 3-5s. And let's say the 2 3-5s are very solid 3-5s, and 3-0 is a decent 3-0. 4-0, 3-0, 2 3-5s, right? That's what you have playing. So the question that arises is, where should the 3-5s, where should the 3-5s hit their shots if they want to win the game? I mean, the answer should be pretty simple, right? They hit all their shots to the 3.0 player. If the 3-5s want to win that game, if that's their objective, then what they should do clearly is hit all of their shots to the 3.0 player. Now that makes absolute sense if you're in a tournament setting. However, in this case, I'm going to suggest that if you're thinking about the bigger picture, there's a different answer to the question. Because here's the question I would ask you. How often do the 2 3-5s get to learn, grow, and test themselves against this sort of 4.0 play? If it's not that often, right? If this is the kind of play that is not that frequent at your facility, then wouldn't it behoove the 3-5s to hit, not all the shots, because you don't want to freeze out the 3-0 either, but doesn't it make sense for the 3-5s to hit a lot of their shots to the 4-0? This is the opportunity for them to grow, for them to see different shots, different approaches to the game. And if they hit all the shots at 3-0, again, there's, what is the advantage to the 3-5s of doing that? Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that the 3-0 be frozen out and not be hit to. What I'm suggesting is that there's a thought process that happens oftentimes, that I see it oftentimes, and I've been subjected to it in many different locations around the country, which is, I'll go out to play, and sometimes I'll be the best player at the facility on that given moment, right? And I'll go out to play, and I'm happy to play with different levels, but I won't get hit a ball. And let me ask you a question. If I don't get hit a ball, am I ever coming back to play with that group? The answer should be pretty obvious. And the same thing is going to happen with the 4-0 that comes to that club. If the 4-0 comes to the club and gets frozen out, why would that player ever come back, right? Think of the loss to the group, to the entire group, from not having these better players to play against. And what I find interesting is players always say, off court, they always say, I want to play against better players, right? I want to get out there and I want to see what better players are doing. I can grow as a player and things like that. And not invariably, but too often, and I would say the vast majority of times, the better player gets on the court and gets frozen out because all the balls go to the weaker player on the court. And again, I'm not suggesting the weaker player shouldn't get any balls, but if for the good of the group and as and letting the better player know, okay, we appreciate that you're coming here, throw some shots to the better player, even if it costs you the game, right? Don't sit back there with your partner and go, hey, stop hitting balls to the good player, hit balls to the weaker player. Again, it depends on what your objectives are, but I'm telling you this, for you personally as a player, you're better off seeing some shots from the player that might be a little bit better than you right now, so you can see what's going on out there, and also to encourage that player to come back and play with you again. Now, targeting is perfectly fine if you're playing in a tournament. So reserve targeting for when you're playing in tournaments. It's super smart strategy to use in those situations. In rec play, hit shots to the better player and learn what you can from their experience and their level of play. All right, that's this week's podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. As always, a rating and review really helps us. If you're interested in joining the therapist program that we're talking about, send me an email at pickleballtherapy@betterpickleball.com or therapy@betterpickleball.com, whichever you like better. Send me that email, comes directly to my inbox, so you'll get me directly with that. And then we're trying to see if folks out there would like this idea of coming up with like a way to become a therapist. And it's as I mentioned last time, it's not really a commitment to us. It is sort of, but it's not really, because we're still going to do the podcast anyway. It's a commitment to yourself. What you're doing is you're saying to yourself, I am going to do this, this, and this. And then that's what'll then let you become a therapist and to keep your, and again, we're not using the term therapist medically here. We're using it like in a pickleball context, but basically you're your own therapist and you're committing to what you've done already to get that therapist labeled for yourself, or that therapist designation. And then you're going to commit to do a certain amount of work after that to continue to be your own therapist out on the pickleball court. As always, at the end, we always say the same thing. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with your friends. Remember, if you enjoyed the podcast, they probably will too. There may be some lost souls out there who would benefit from hearing Dave's story, knowing they're not alone, and hearing some tips on how they might be able to find their way out of the pickleball jungle we sometimes get lost in. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.